Superannuation is super important, even if it's not super sexy. Retiring with the money you deserve matters and has wide-reaching ripple effects for individuals, their children, and society at large. Yet many of us don't think about super until retirement is upon us because it's not a tangible asset like a house, and we can't spend it now. There's already a significant gender super gap, largely in part to women doing often more of the caregiving and earning less, and for divorced women, the super gap is a staggering 113% less compared to their male partners. So if you're thinking that this makes superannuation a women's only issue, you'd be mistaken. This is a topic relevant to men and women, as well as to parents, wanting to break intergenerational patterns that can lead to poverty and homelessness for women over the age of 55. In this episode of the Separation Guide podcast, I'm joined by Lucy Keogh and Angela Harbinson. Lucy founded Tap the Gap for women just like her mother, a single mum who retired after 48 years as a primary school teacher with no superannuation. Lucy is a marketing creative director and subject matter expert, and she is nuts about super and empowering all Australians, especially women, to take control of their financial future with an app that automates retail loyalty cashback from your shopping into extra contributions. She's spreading the good word about the gender super gap with her workshop, Women and Superannuation. What the actual? Angela Harbinson founded the Separation Guide after witnessing too many friends and family members go through long, expensive and emotionally harrowing divorces. She was sure there must be a better way, so she created one. The Separation Guide is a platform connecting Australians with professionals and resources to help them take control of their separation and divorce journey with less cost, less conflict and less confusion. Advocating for fair and amicable separations, the Separation Guide is shining a light on the astounding 113% super gap for divorced women in Australia. Together, they explain what superannuation is, why it matters, and how to harness this asset to ensure a better retirement. In the context of separation and divorce, super is often the second largest asset pool to be shared, yet many of us assume a 50-50 split is appropriate. In this chat, we learn that this assumption may be flawed and that both partners' super should be seen as one collective pot, not two separate ones. We share tangible takeaways to help people separating find out what their combined super total is, how to find lost super, and steps to carve up this important asset in fair ways. And if you think you've left your focus and action on superannuation too late, then think again. It's never too late to upskill and to take action. Because as Ange says, knowledge isn't just power, it's comfort, which we all need more of now and in retirement. We are talking today about a word and a concept that I think a lot of us haven't given any thought to before, superannuation. And the reason we probably don't give it much thought, I wonder, is if because we think superannuation is something that's only relevant to us down the track. It's not relevant now. And if I'm focusing on my work, my family, my children, my finances now, super feels like something way off in the distance. Whether I'm married, single, separated or divorced, I wonder if that's the case for many of us. How does that do us a disservice if that is the case, Lucy? Tell us the importance of superannuation. What is it and why does it matter?
So superannuation, Spina, is a really boring, dry word and, it doesn't hold a lot of meaning for people in Australia. The key definition of superannuation is that it is money that you earn while you're working. So right now it is law that anyone who is working over 30 hours a week, if you're under 18 or if you're over 18, doesn't matter how many hours you work, you are entitled to super. Now that money is 11.5% on what your wages are, whatever you're earning, any wage, any stage. Really the best way to think about super is it's the greatest side hustle you'll ever have. It is money that is literally working on the side while you're working. It's not a savings account. It's actually money that's being invested for you. And that's money is put into different companies and different entities and invested in different ways for the sole purpose of delivering a larger sum of money when you stop working. It is there to support your retirement alongside the age pension. So that's it. It's not a very sexy word. And the reason that potentially a lot of us don't think about it is that super is a really low engagement category. I mean, we probably spend more time thinking about the lip gloss we choose to put on a weekend night out versus our superannuation. Remember, you start your first job, you're given a form, you probably didn't know what it looked like, you signed away, and you got it. And every single time you move jobs, someone talks about it to you, but it's a very dry, boring conversation. And the language around it is very complex, unnecessarily so. So I think what we've come to know as Australians, and particularly as women, is that that's something I'll think about tomorrow. It's a bit of a tomorrow problem. The issue is, if you do make it a tomorrow, it will become a tomorrow problem if you don't look at it today.
Talk to us about the gender super gap. We all know what the gender gap is. How does that apply in the super world?
So yes, there's a lot of, airtime that we're given to the super gender gap, the pay gap, essentially, if you want to talk about it that way. And that's great, right? Because that is fundamentally women should be paid what they're worth and what they should earn, like for like. Now, what a lot of people don't think about, though, is, that's great if I'm now getting paid what I'm paid, but the knock-on effect of that gender pay gap is that down the track, 30, 40, 50 years, if you're getting underpaid, then there's a snowball effect with super. Essentially, super is just the big hero of compound interest. It's a snowball. And if your snowball is smaller to begin with and doesn't pick up a lot of speed along the way, right at the end, it's going to be nowhere near as big as the others. And that's why you see that huge gap created between men and women, mostly from the age of about 30, which is traditionally here in Australia when women are of childbearing age. They take that time out of the workforce. Not everyone. Some people do, some people don't. And that has that compound effect in a negative way. And that's what we see. But we don't, again, because we don't talk about super, it's a bit like, hey, we don't talk about Bruno, is the sort of Disney, the Pixar commercial classic. But because we're not talking about super, then we're not thinking about it till we're maybe nearly 50 going, I'm thinking about retirement. We've lost about 30 years that we could have bumped up our super. And that's the conversation we need to be having with the next generation of women.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How did you get involved? Tell us a bit about your story. I know you've got a creative background, and then you found that this topic, this issue, was meaningful to you on a personal level. How was it?
Yes, so I'm from a creative agency background, a creative director in advertising and marketing. Basically spent the last 20 years solving problems. That's really what you do as a creative, and that's big and small problems for brands, whether it's, we don't know how to talk to this particular audience, or we need a new product because ours is really out of date, or we have to change our complete brand positioning because a competitor's taken over. So I was working my day job, if you like, and I was working on a super fund. A lot of people would say, oh gosh, that's so boring. How could you work in financial services, working on a super fund? But I really find a great challenge in taking what is seemingly a boring topic and being able to communicate that and express that in simple, engaging ways. So I was working on a super fund, and I discovered this issue as I'm digging deep in their website, by the way, 5 pages in, about women retiring with 28% less super. Now, I nearly fell off my chair thinking, is that a joke? I am juggling kids. I am hardly brushing my hair when I leave the house. I'm working this big job. How am I going to end up with that kind of a stat? And it felt really unfair. And it did bring me back to my roots. As a child, my mum was a primary school teacher of 48 years, and she brought up 4 kids by herself. She taught countless taxpayers how to read and write. And yet when she separated from my dad, she retired with no superannuation and very little financial security that came with that. And that really made me mad. But the more I started digging, the more I realised that she wasn't alone. This is a really big problem that so many women in Australia are facing, and it's up to us to really look for new ways and use technology to be able to solve these issues. So that's where the origins of Tap the Gap came from, which is a way to help educate women on finances, starting with super, and take their discounts that they earn from their retail purchases when they're shopping and automate that into their super. So we're helping close that super gap in two ways.
All right, and it's not unusual for us to have a lived experience that leads us to feel passionate and want to create change as an innovator or change maker. So that's clear where that's come from for you. Ange, I'm going to bring you in here as the CEO of the Separation Guide because your story's got some similarities around being a change maker and a creative and wanting to catalyse change on a collective and a large scale. Tell us a bit about why superannuation matters in the separation and divorce domain.
For me, I think superannuation is such a big part of a separation, and a lot of people, just as Lucy touched on, don't know anything about it, don't know what their balance is and don't know what their partner's balance is, and forget that for a lot of people it's actually the second largest asset in their asset pool, and it's something that's been left on the table for a lot of people. So like Lucy's story of her mum, I was hearing it time and time again of women, particularly in their 50s and 60s, reaching that retirement age with no super because they hadn't taken that into consideration when they divorced, or they hadn't had any legal or financial advice through that process of separation and divorce. And so it's one of those big regrets that I wish I had done this, that often happens 10 or 20 years down the track. So we sort of set off to make a change in this area. I am passionate about a world of gender equality in our future. And I think this is a 113% gender super gap for divorced women is not okay. And when I saw Lucy, I said, let's come together and do something about this.
Okay, so we've got joined forces here around a really important issue. And even as I'm listening to both of you speak, as a woman in my 50s and as a parent to two adult daughters, I know that this is not something I've attended to. I know that we'll have countless listeners whose ears are pricking up thinking, yeah, I haven't attended to this. So where do I start? What do I do regardless of the age or stage I'm at, particularly, of course, in the context of this conversation? I'm in the process of separating, or perhaps I'm considering separating, or maybe I just haven't put to bed the final details. And part of me might want to just get this over and done with. This is a complex time. It's filled with stress and anxiety and frustration and pain and hurt. I don't want to think about my superannuation. I just want to get closure and move on. What am I doing wrong here? What can I do differently?
Well, yeah, I mean, super, as I said, is one of those assets that need to be discussed. So I think at a simple level, start by asking the question, look for your super balance. So you should be able to access that through the ATO site. Ask the question about your partner's super balance, because if you know those two things, you're already well on the way to having more information around you. And in the process of a separation, we don't say knowledge is power. We use the term knowledge is comfort, because when you know all of the facts, you feel more comfortable about what your options are and what you can do.
Okay. So we understand why, and Lucy's put some words to this too, that women, particularly childbearing years, may step away or reduce their working hours, so they're reducing their income, so their superannuation will be less. That's clearly understood by all of us. So how might I navigate this through separation and divorce when once I've accessed or got an idea of what my super looks like and my partner's super looks like, what is fair here?
I think sometimes what we look at, and Angela would obviously be more in a state to answer this in terms of things that get separated 50-50 or how things get split in a separation. But I do think it's important for women in particular to understand that it's not just about the past, it is about the future. And super is a culmination that actually is a joint asset. So you might say, take your individual super and your partner's individual super. But if you have had time out to care for children or to run a household or do something similar that is a partnership arrangement, it is all of your super. That is your asset, because there's no way that other party could have created that super if you weren't doing the other job. So that's one thing to think about. You really need to know that that is a collective asset, not just we're both bringing our own things, because the way that asset has been created is in partnership. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing to think about is super in an ongoing sense, because again, if particularly as a woman you have taken time out of the workforce, then you have huge gaps in your workplace experience, your learning, your capacity to be paid. And so in those future years to come, you are affected in your ability to earn more super. And that's something that we need to think about, because, you know, super is, again, a long-term investment. It's not short-term, it's long-term. And you want to be able to know that that money that you've got in super is investing and growing. And as you add to it as an individual over the next however many years, there's huge impacts on that. So I think it's important to just not think about it as a past asset or something that's just been created. It is about where does the future of your super take you, and think about it in that way. I would encourage people to.
Ange, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, I really wanted to touch on here a really important thing about the way the law looks at fairness, because it is one of the biggest misconceptions we hear is, 50-50 sounds fair. We're split, yeah, that sounds fair. But when you look at, as Lucy touched on, if one party is outside of the workforce for a period of time, the way the law protects people through this process is it looks at not only the financial contributions of I earned this much salary and I earned this much salary, they also look at the non-financial contributions that party has made. So I've stayed at home for 5 or 10 years and taken the primary caregiving responsibilities. Therefore, my earning capacity, my superannuation is lower. So it looks at that, and it also looks at future needs of what you will need for the rest of that period of time where you continue to be the primary caregiver of those children. So that's why we say legal advice is really important, because the layer that they provide to you is, and this can come from a legally qualified mediator or from a lawyer, so it doesn't have to be one or the other. They will tell you what the fairness looks like in the eyes of the law. The other common thing here is why we have this 113% super gap issue. And that is because there's such an overwhelming number of people in our community who are doing what we call the DIY divorce without the right information. And that's why the separation guide exists. We're really here to help educate people on the facts that they need to know to make better and more informed decisions. But we also advocate that in that process, they can do much of the work themselves to reach agreement and stay as amicable as possible, but do get some legal advice on that issue of fairness for your situation, because it will be completely different to your next door neighbour's best friend's cousin who got separated just 2 weeks ago. Your situation is completely unique, and it's really good to have a view of what fairness will look like for you and for your future.
So how would someone access the SEP Guide plan, which is the process that the Separation Guide offers? What are the first steps there if I'm now only considering I need to explore superannuation? I understand its meaning and its power and its importance in my life and at my family's life, my future, my partner. What's the first step that I would take, and how would the SEP Guide plan assist me in that process?
Yeah, look, it's put in place to really give you all of the framework you need to get through this and give you step-by-step guidance. And that starts by taking the 3-minute Q&A on our website, so theseparationguide.com.au. In that process, it asks you the question about if you've been a primary caregiver, what your salary is, what your partner's salary is, and it starts to unravel some different considerations that you might have around the assets in your asset pool and your personal situation. So when you start and access the plan, so that's a subscription process, if you access that plan, it will give you access to sessions with professionals. And we see that as a really important part of getting through this with the right guidance, because there's another really big unknown thing about separating super and the process of splitting super. You actually require a legal professional to be involved in that process. Otherwise, you can't separate your super. And that's a big thing that we're really focusing on with superannuation bodies and others, to say, how can we look at this problem and make it more accessible for more people, faster for people to access that information, and faster for them and less costly for them to be able to go through that process of separating it, so that they are protecting themselves for the future. Because as Lucy said, super is this gold pot at the end of your life that, if you don't think about it, could be the difference between you living in poverty and on the edge of homelessness, as opposed to living and flourishing in retirement.
Is there any stats that either of you have around poverty and women in middle age or later life with a financial lens?
Yes, I think the most scary statistic around that, and it's not to scare your listeners, but it is to make them aware that women over the age of 55 are 8 times more likely to be homeless than men. It is the fastest growing group of homelessness in Australia. And that's just tragic, right? Like, that is a lot of the knock-on effect is that women have separated and are left with no real retirement fund to draw on, and hence have become homeless. So, wherever you're at in that stage of thinking about separating or in the middle of separation, think about it as something that, yes, you need to look at now through this process, but something you need to engage with in the future as well, because there's all sorts of things that you can do, simple things, to make sure that your super is working the best for you. There's a lot of Australians who are in funds that are underperforming, basically because they've never changed their investment choice. They might just have been set with the default fund. And let's be honest, it's not your fault. No one sat you down in primary school and taught you about superannuation. They didn't even sit you down in high school and do that. And all of the women that I've been speaking to and I've been running workshops with, the experience of super is the same. It is not our fault that we don't understand this. One of the key barriers for women engaging in super is that they're embarrassed. And I get that, because you're talking to women who excel in every other part of their life, and they get to this thing and they feel really awkward and they don't have the confidence. But really, there are some simple steps that you can take, even by listening, to some information for 30 minutes, or just actually even listening to what we're talking about today. If you were to download the app for your super fund, you're already ahead of the game, because there's 33% of Australians never ever check their super, never. Yeah. But we should be checking it like a bank account, because you can do that now. So, think about it in a way that it's your money. That's the fundamental thing you have to know. Our challenge is that because we don't touch super until we're over 60, we never see it. It's not tangible. And therefore, coming back to that initial point, we just don't have an emotional connection with it. So it's really about showing a bit of love for your super, because it is your self-work. You've worked hard for it, whether that's being at home and allowed your partner to work and earn super. It is your value, it is your money and your reward for working hard. And I think if women can say, actually, I deserve to have my super in a great place, then that's going to drive them towards taking these simple steps to do so. And that's what Angela and I are here to support for our audience.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. That's very clear. It started off as the greatest side hustle, but now it's so much more than that after the conversation and what you both are sharing. It would be very easy for some people to listen to this conversation and think, well, that's all very well and good, but that's not my business. I'm thinking particularly perhaps about younger women or men who didn't leave the workforce, who recognise that they have a healthy super balance. And although you've expressed so clearly that it's a collective pool and the second greatest asset that we have in the separation and divorce process or in life, what messages are there for, and they're two separate audiences, I recognise, but for young people, women and men for that matter, how can we educate the next generation? And secondly, for men who are listening, who are going through divorce, how can we take a collective, and we've used the word fair approach, so that everyone has a responsibility to ensure that super is handled responsibly and fairly for everyone in the mix?
Men and, partners of any gender are a huge part of the solution here, because you can actually make a spousal contribution through super. Most people don't know that. Again, on face value, if someone just said, "Oh, did you know your partner can add to your super when you're off having kids?" Most people fall over. They're like, "What? Oh, I didn't know that." Even being able to share some of that super and put it into a woman's super account whilst they're not earning their own money is a huge thing, right? That can fill that gap over those years early on. So there's a couple of different ways that you can make spousal contributions. It can be a tax benefit for a partner because it helps reduce their taxable income, or it can be after tax as well. So there's two key ways to do it. And I think on top of that, the approach we're taking with Tap the Gap is that men are part of the solution and partners are, and that's why we're making our app that will be coming out in a few months' time for everyone. If a man goes shopping and earns some retail cashback, he can put that straight into the super fund of his partner. Let's understand that, yes, while separations can be incredibly difficult, it's not that both parties don't always want the best for each other at the end of that. And so I think there is a role to play in the way to think about that future. How are you going to support your partner? I know through friends of mine who've separated, the man wants to ensure that the woman is in great health and in great financial state because they are raising the children. They are looking after the rest of the family. It's not always the case that separations end in a nasty place. So I do think that there's opportunity for men to be able to go, well, what can I do from this point of separation to contribute to my partner's super, or in ways that will benefit her and the family to come. I'm sure, Angela, you have some thoughts as well.
I'm sure you do too, Angela. I'd like to hear, but I'd also like to just explore in an acrimonious separation, there might be possibilities here for partners who are feeling angry and hard done by, or feeling like their asset pool is not as big as they want it to be or as healthy as they want it to be, to think kind of creatively here that although I may feel strapped against the house or the mortgage, there is another pool here that we can tap into that will help create a fairer outcome for both of us that may have been overlooked.
Potentially so, yeah. And again, it's because we don't think about super, correct? But small amounts that are added to your super over the next 10, 20 years, that can have a huge effect on your outcome. So there may be a way that a partner, makes that commitment in separation to put additional money into that's partner's super fund. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't that be an amazing outcome? Yeah. Let's remember that up until $1.9 million when you retire, that money is tax-free. And again, we forget about that. We think about houses. We're a nation that's obsessed with property, and we don't always think about the benefits of, well, what is the money that I'm taking out of my super at the end of the day? So again, thinking about those things and the benefits of putting money and putting investments in super for the long term.
Mm-hmm. And did you have thoughts through the work that you do?
Yeah, many on this topic. I think, as you say, we are a country that is obsessed with property. And I think one of the things that happen when you're going through a separation is one of the first, Maslow hierarchy of needs instances is I want safety, I want my house, I want protection. So often people will default to wanting the family home to remain that main asset, and therefore forgo super as part of the split. So that's a big one we see. And again, one of the things why I love it when people meet with a financial advisor to really model out the differences of different scenarios, to say, well, look, hey, if I do take this house at, it's valued at this now, when I'm at retirement, that house is going to be possibly valued based on historical data at this amount. But if I put that same amount into super, that would be based at this amount. And when you can see the things visually in front of you, because I'm like a lot of people, I'm sure, that are out there listening today, some of the financial things will wash over my head. If I can see it visually, I absolutely get it. But if it's jargon and things that are being said to me, it just all becomes gobbledygook. So it's much easier if who you're working with can document something for you to look at and show you scenarios. So talk to your advisor, get that. The other point I wanted to touch on that you mentioned, Sabina, was around acrimonious separation. So for everyone out there, that's where maybe there is a bit more of a conflict in what you're with your partner. Often in those cases, people will go two ways. They'll either avoid the law, go, I can't do this, it's all too hard, I'll just accept that and I just want this over and done with. And that's what almost 67% of people are doing, a DIY divorce, and a lot of people are going into what we call that flight mode. It's too hard, I can't do this. The other side is they end up working with legal professionals, and sometimes that can be tricky, but the way the law works is if there are assets, the law, it's against the law not to bring all those assets to the table for discussion. So part of the legal process is what they call disclosure. So superannuation would be out there on the table for everyone to see as part of that process.
So instead of taking a fight or flight response, which is easily done when we're under stress and in an acrimonious or high conflict situation, or we just want it to go away and we want to be done with, and I use that words in inverted commas, the person that we no longer want to be in constant conversation with or negotiating with, we think it's kind of short-term pain, for long-term gain is what's required here, is to step up, put it on the table, have the conversation instead of trying to take the back door, which actually is going to lead to a slippery slope in financial terms for everyone.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, we hear it all the time where people say almost with pride, oh, I left his super. I didn't touch his super. And it's a shift we'd like to make. It should, as Lucy said, that asset is a shared asset between both parties. So put it on the table, talk about it, and look at how that can be divided for future benefit for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just wrap with each of yours. What are your top 3 takeaways here? Because people will be processing as they're listening. I hadn't thought about it that way before. I don't know what my super is. I don't know what my partner's super is. I was ready to take the flight response and just run for path of least resistance and lowest hanging fruit. Now I've heard some things today that have made me rethink that. What are some top takeaway tangible tips that I can do now to help me move closer to an equitable super outcome?
I just love the word now, because now, like I say, eats tomorrow for breakfast, because you might think I've left it too late. I'm in my 40s, I'm in my 50s. I can't look at my super. You absolutely can. And I think just put aside any shame you might feel, any resistance, any awkwardness, and say, I want to talk about my super. And it can be as little as a phone call. We have to remember super funds are working for you. I've had women who I've connected with, I've said, A, it's not your fault. B, call your super fund. They're working for you. So you call them up, you have a conversation, you find out how much you've got. It's like people haven't even thought, oh, I can do that. It's so intangible. So I would say do that thing of finding out how much you've got first up, and then you can think about taking those steps moving forward. And that's one of the key things that you can do. Downloading the app is synonymous with that, because that lets you track and see and understand your super in a way like you would check a bank account. So that would be my top sort of takeaway. Make a call, download an app. You can do that in under 5 minutes.
And which app, just for clarity, Lucy, are you talking about your app or the ATO or what?
No, I'm talking about every super fund has their own app.
Their own app.
So just like I won't say every super fund. There's over 1,000 super funds in Australia. Most of them, definitely the bigger ones, have their own app. So you can download that with your member number that you can find on your statement, search through your email or call them up and they'll give you a member number, and literally you create a login just like a bank login. That is power in your hand and you're in control of it from that moment.
And what happens if I don't even know where my super is?
So then that's fine. You can talk to the ATO and speak to them, and ultimately you will find a key super fund. You'll probably look at the one that's got the most in it, and then your action is to call that super fund, and they will actually gather all the other super funds and do that job for you. So they'll what they call consolidate your super. If that's the fund you want to go with, great. But know that they do the hard work. People think, oh, I've got to go and find it from here and here. No, they do it for you. So, yeah, that would be your next step if you really don't know what you have or who you have. If you have a current employer, that's a great person to talk to as well, outside of the ATO.
Plus, to reiterate what you said earlier, Lucy, to check your partner's balance as well. So you've got a full picture. It's not his and mine or theirs and mine. It's a collective asset that we're going to work through in a fair and equitable way to help support us all in a family unit moving forward. Ange, what are some of your top tangible tips for now?
I always say understand your options, because when you know, you feel more comfort. Get some advice. So I always suggest some legal and financial advice. And a lot of super funds, you can actually get financial advice through your super fund. So don't be afraid to use that. But we also, through the SEP Guide Plan, you can access legal and financial sessions included in that at a very reasonable price, which makes it really easy for people. And last but not least, I would say, in the spirit of keeping things amicable, don't think that raising the topic of superannuation is always going to start a fight, because often I think your partner will be absolutely recognise that there is a difference in super balances, and see that if they know that super is part of it, they will recognise that that is part of the pool to be divided. So don't be afraid to have the conversation.
So this is everybody's issue, isn't it? This is something we all need to attend to. And I'm thinking about partners separating, but also, as we've alluded to, young people too. So as parents, there's a role here as well, separated or not, to help inform and guide. And when young people start new jobs, instead of focusing on just what the salary is, to talk about what the super component means for them long term.
I think it's really interesting you say that. I've found with a lot of the women who have come through my workshops, their takeaway is, I really want to set my daughter up. And that to me is so exciting, because that is about, okay, we can have this conversation today and it's going to impact generational change. And that is something that you can do. You can have a conversation, tell them what super is to begin with, like that's already streaks ahead. So I think we need for women to understand that even though it's awkward and feels confusing, the reality is a simple conversation around it can have a huge impact. And the earlier you start contributing to your super, the better. You'll be laughing. So for me, for young people who love their lifestyle, and it is all about their lifestyle, I approach that with, if you want to have this lifestyle for the rest of time, then invest in your lifestyle. And that's what super is for them.
Well, thank you both, for helping us unpack the greatest side hustle of all time. I think I would hope and believe that our listeners will realise that this is more important than the lip gloss you choose on a Saturday night or clothes you wear, that there are long-term ramifications here. There are options, there are choices, and the time is now.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
At the Separation Guide, we measure our success by our ability to keep you out of conflict and get through separation in the best possible way, protecting your long-term health, wealth, and happiness. The Separation Guide Plan provides you with step-by-step guidance on all stages of separation and aims to empower you with the knowledge, expert resources, skills, and strategies to take each step with confidence. Every specialist attached to our platform is measured on their ability to do the same, and everyone signs an ethical charter showing we all believe that court should be seen as a last resort. If you'd like to learn more about your options in separation or you want to be put in touch with professionals to guide you through, please go to theseparationguide.com.au and complete our 3-minute interactive Q&A, or check out our other podcasts and blogs. If you found the information today useful, please subscribe, share and leave us a review. It's a great way to help our podcast reach others going through separation. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Separation Guide acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. If this chat has piqued your interest and you're wanting to learn more, sign up today for the upcoming free online event, Super in Separation. 5 things you'll want to know before finalising a separation agreement. The event's being held on Wednesday the 26th of March between 12 and 1 p.m, and it's online, it is free, via a Google Meet link. You'll find more information on the Separation Guide podcast.